The Surrounded by D'Arcy McNickle, Chapter 6. On the same day that Max Leone visited Father Gropilio at the mission, our child's mother invited her relatives and friends to a feast in the honor of her returned son. She killed one of her own steers, of which she had more than a few head, as she had horses also, and before sundown the fires were burning. 5 teepees had been set up in the low ground by the creek, where they were hidden from the big house. After nightfall the flames would light up the black encircling pines, and the reflection would fall upon the windows of the house and cast a soft glow in Max's bedroom. There would be voices rising up to him too. He would lie in bed swearing at the noise, wondering what it signified, whether the voices were sad or happy. Our child sat near the entrance of the principal tepee, that of the old Modeste, the blind chief, who was either the uncle or the brother-in-law of his mother. Indian relationships in the old style were always a bit vague to him. Modeste had no Modeste he knew as a gentle old man who had appeared at intervals during his life in some act of generosity, either giving him, as a child, a finely wrought bow and bone-tipped arrows such as he had not been made in many years, and teaching him to shoot it, or sending him, when he was going away to school, a safe-keeper which the old man had carried since his own boyhood. Our child still possessed 2 such amulets from Modeste's hand, one an eagle bone whistle, and the other a polished claw of a grizzly. And then, when our child had quite grown, giving him a horse, saddle, and bridle. That was the old Modeste. There he sat, smoking and waiting for the women to serve the meat, his sightless eyes blinking to his thought. Our child's mother occupied a place of distinction in the tribe. She was the daughter of the chief Running Wolf, who had welcomed the fathers, and since the title was heredity, she was still of the chief's family. More than that, she was a woman whose opinions were valued, and they were given only when sought. Just now she was directing the several women who were preparing the meal, and drawing laughter from the women with her sharp comments. Rose has such a big buttocks now she can't bend to stir the fire. Look, mine? You see, I keep them out of sight. I sit on them. This was true of his mother, but our child had never thought of it as a matter of importance. It did not count in his scale of values. Old Modeste, more than his mother, made what he was seem important. If he had commanded an action, you would have to do it, while if his mother commanded, you might do it. But you would be amused. You would smile and tease her a little by pretending that you weren't going to do it. Actually, in the way he was learning the world, neither Modeste nor his mother was important. They were not real people. Buffaloes were not real to him either. Yet he could go and look at buffaloes every day if he wished, behind the wire enclosure of the Biological Survey Reserve. He knew that buffaloes had been real things to his mother, and to the old people who had come to eat with her tonight. To him, they were just fenced-up animals that couldn't be shot, though you could take photographs of them. Amusing was what it was. After living in Portland, playing the violin, living in a boarding house, reading baseball scores, it was funny to come home and sit at his mother's feast. His eyes saw the old faces, faces he had forgotten about, never thought to see again, and now to be sitting in a circle of firelight and looking at them. But it wasn't really funny, not deeply funny. The deeper feeling was impatience, irritation, an uneasy feeling in his stomach. Why could he not endure them for just these few hours? Why did they make him feel sick? It was not to be reasoned with. It did no good to remind himself that the old faces were not at fault, that his mother, who had never struck him, scarcely even spoken angrily to him, was in no way to blame for what he felt, and neither were the buffalo to blame for being no longer free. Reason wouldn't quite do the trick, but he would try it. He would sit quietly and try not to see or hear or smell too much. He would try not to speak, lest he say more than was necessary. And in a few hours, days, he had come home this time because it would be the last time. When he went away again, this he knew, he would not return. He tried to eat the way one had to at a feast. He tried to play the part, but when he had devoured about a pound of roasted meat, he began to feel sick. The old people joked him. Here is a lump of hot fat the size of your head. That will do you good. His stomach turned. He felt the blood drain out of his face. That would kill a dog. His voice sounded weak. A pleasant death. A dog wouldn't mind dying with a full belly. A sile, a native Salish with no R's, and the old people could not pronounce his name the way it was written. In the old days your mother would have been ashamed of you. An ancient aunt, Mrs. Beaverfoot, made this observation. She never had got over the fact that Catherine was Pusopi, that is, she had married a white man. If I had been born in the old days, our child tried to not be unconcerned in his tone, though he remarked the remark made him angry. Then I would not be as I am now. You people talk about the old days as if they were here, but they're gone, dead. So don't tell me what I ought to do to be like that. Ah, this boy is right. This was Modesty. You old women forget that what our children are like they cannot help. It began before their time. At that they all shook their heads and looked mournful. All conversations about the old people ended in this way. No matter what they talked about, before they had finished, they were shaking their heads and thinking about what was gone. Now that they were started, they would go on digging up their troubles and telling stories of the old days. Our child, with his impertinent new ways of thinking, would be forgotten. He could sink back, glad to not be noticed, and let them talk. Time would pass that way. The first story was told by an old woman. Her scarcity of teeth gave an odd sound to some of her words, but the story was an old one and nothing was lost. In the long ago the animals had tribes, just like men. Coyote had his own tribe, and this was one of the mightiest. Now he was hungry, and all his people were hungry. They had nothing to eat. He sat in his tepee and pulled his blanket close. If I just had something to put on my arrow, he said. It was like this. He had nothing to put on his arrow. He had just bark, and you could see that would not go through a buffalo. When he shot something with the bark, it just bounced off, and the buffalo said, "Now I will eat that fly if he doesn't go away." And Coyote had nothing to eat. Next day he went to see Fox, and Fox was cooking a piece of meat on a stick. He was holding it to the fire. Coyote sat down and watched the meat getting cooked, and he smelled the hot fat, and he got very hungry. Then, when it was all cooked, Coyote jumped and grabbed the meat and put it in his mouth all at once. But when he bit, there was something hard in it, and it was the flint. "Now why didn't you tell me you had the flint?" Coyote asked. "When did the flint go along here?" Fox said it was 3 days now since the flint went by. Then Coyote took his blanket and his things and started after the flint. When he had walked all day, he said, "Here is where the flint camped." Then he slept. Another day he traveled, and then he said, "The flint made his bed here," and he slept in that place. Then he walked the next day, and at night he said, "The flint started from here this morning," and so he slept again. The next morning he got up early and walked fast, and there he saw the flint going along the road. Coyote went out that way and then went faster and got ahead of the flint and waited. And when the flint came, Coyote said, "So here you are. Come here now, and I will fight you." And the flint said, "All right, we will fight." Then they were fighting and going this way and that way, and Coyote took what he had in his hand. It was a war club, and he hit the flint very hard, and the flint broke into pieces. "Hoy!" said Coyote, "it is done." And he put the pieces in his blanket and put it on his shoulder and started back. Then he said to his people, "Just put some of the flint on the point of your arrows, and we will kill the buffalo." Then he went to all the tribes and gave them flint, and after that they did not have to starve. That is the story of Flint. When the story was told, everybody laughed. It was a very old story, the kind grandmothers told to their grandchildren. And it always made people laugh. Our child had not intended to listen, yet he had heard every word. The story had amused him in spite of himself. It left a spark of gay remembrance in his mind. The next story was told by Whitty, an old man who had been born, they said, with a streak of white running through the black. His story was about the thing that was to make life easy. It went like this. There was an old man who had a dream, and in this dream it said that something was coming that would make life easy. They would not have to hunt or dig for roots or do any kind of work, but they had to watch out and not let this thing that was to make life easy escape their notice. When the old man had this dream, he was astonished, and he went about telling people something is coming that will make life easy. Then he sat down to watch for it. He would not go on the hunt, and he would not dig for roots or do any kind of work. He did not want to miss it. His people laughed at him. They said, "He always He was always a lazy man. Now he will never work." So they went off to hunt and get food and left him sitting. And it went that way for many years. He sat in front of his lodge and waited. Sometimes he got very hungry because the hunters brought him nothing. Only his little grandchild kept him from starving. She took a piece of meat from her mother and brought it to the old man. She did this every day. One day, Old Man went away. They did not see him go, but when they came by his lodge, he was not sitting there. "Where did Old Man go?" they asked. Nobody knew. Even the grandchild did not know. "He just found a softer seat someplace," they said, and then they went hunting. All the men went from the village and left only the women and children and the very old ones. They were gone a long time, as they had to cross the mountains to the east and go to the plains where they hunted buffalo. So there were no men in the village when Old Man came back. Yes, he came back finally, that old man. He carried something under his blanket. They looked at him, but they were afraid to ask what it was. He sent out a call that all were to come to his lodge, and when they came there he said, "Make a meal, and then I will show you the thing that is to make life easy." When he had eaten, he said, "Come with me to the woods, and I will show you this thing." He went first carrying in a bundle in his arms, and all those who would, and, ch- and all those women and children and the very old ones followed. Their eyes were big and said, "Is it true, or is Old Man a fool now?" And the old ones grumbled because everybody was walking so fast. He stopped when he came to a young cottonwood by the water. He put his bundle on the ground. Then he spoke to the people who crowded near. "Oh, you foolish ones!" That was how he spoke to them. "You did not believe it would come, but here it is. The thing that will make life easy is here now." So he opened his bundle, and there it was. The people looked at the shiny thing, and they were full of wonder. "I will strike that tree 5 times, and it will fall." That was what he told them. It was not a very large tree, but even so in the old days it would take a man maybe half a day to make it fall, because in those times their axes were made of stone. And this thing that was to make life easy was an iron axe. Now the people could not believe what he said. They laughed. "Oh, old man, you can't hit that tree 10 times, 20 times, and it will not fall." But some were not so sure. They looked at that shiny thing, and it seemed to wink at them. And these said, "Yes, it will fall. It will fall." Old Man was angry at those who would not believe even now, and he went to the tree and struck it a mighty blow. Big chip flew out. Then he hit a mighty blow on the other side. Again a big chip flew out. Once more on each side, 4 blows in all, and the tree died. It fell on some old people who had come too close and did not expect it to fall. The old man wrapped the axe in his bundle again, and did not wait for their cries of astonishment. He went quickly to the trail which led away from the village. That way the hunters would come when they returned from across the mountains. And there he began to chop down the trees. He chopped every tree that stood near the trail, and he made a pile of the big chips right in the trail. Then he went home. When the hunters came back from across the mountains, they just stopped and cried in astonishment. Then they sat down around the pile of big chips and stared at it. "It has come," they said. "The thing that is to make life easy has come, and we were not here to meet it." When the men entered the village, Old Man was waiting for them. He began to laugh when he saw them, and then everybody began to laugh. It made them happy. Now they had the thing that was going to make life easy. That is the story. Our child heard that story also. He wondered at it. And the more he reflected on it, the more wonderful it grew. A story like that he realized was full of meaning. Others told their stories, then they turned at last to Modeste, the blind chief. He would have to tell a story. They urged him. His sightless eyes blinked rapidly as he gathered his thought before speaking. He was going far back into the past. "These stories make the heart light," he said in his high voice. "My story will have to be a different one. I will tell it for this boy who has just come home after traveling out to the world. You have just heard him say that those old days were dead and won't come again. And it's true. But let me tell you this story so he will see better just what it was like back in those times." I will tell you first that in old times, before any white man came, his people were a mighty race, and their land went from the plains east of the mountains to the Snoqualmie River. This is no boast about something that never was. When we made a treaty with the government, they saw how it was, and that was the country we owned. We had a strong nation, and those who later became our greatest enemies, the Blackfeet and their kinsmen. And the Crows, too, they respected us. We went twice a year to hunt on the Missouri, and there were few who dared invade our hunting ground. It had been that way for longer than any man can say, and then it happened. How it was I cannot say. Up there at Fort Des Prairies, they began to give guns to Blackfeet. No other Indians got these guns, only the Blackfeet. That was when our troubles began. The years that followed were bad. When we went to hunt on the Missouri, the Blackfeet were there ahead of us with their guns. We had bows and arrows and our war clubs. Our people were frightened out of their senses. They had never seen that kind of fighting. A man dropped dead before he came near the enemy. Every year, when we came back from the hunt, there were lodges of women and children with no men. There were lodges of old people, too, with no young sons. At our council, there were some who said we should stay away from the buffalo country and that we could live just as well in mountain game. But those weak ones were not listened to. That land belonged to us, and we had always hunted the buffalo. If we did not fight, they would treat us like dogs, and in a little while they would take away the mountains. They would take the mountains away too. No, we would not listen to those weak ones. It went on that way a long time, and then the white man came to us in the mountains. There were foolish in our councils who said that we ought to just kill every white man that came along because they had given the guns to the Blackfeet. These foolish ones were not listened to either. We made peace with the first ones that came and helped them to find their way through the mountains, and we kept that peace with all of them. Today we can say that we never had the blood of any white man on our hands. It was not that we feared them, but we had to have their guns, and we could not stop being friendly once we had got some guns, as the foolish ones wished, because we had to have more guns. It was a different world from that time. In the old days of ours wars, a few men would be killed and fighting would be a thing you could enjoy like hunting, but now it became a bitter thing. Old scores of blood revenge could never be settled because too many were killed. Maybe this year it was your son, next year it would be your father, then your brother, then your wife, and each time your heart grew heavier. You cut off your hair so many times that you forgot how they had lived before all this happened. The old ones could say it had not always been thus, but the young ones thought they talked in dreams. For them, the world had always been bitter. When we got our guns, we had a great battle with the Piegans, the kingsmen of the Blackfeet. They did not know we had these guns, and they rode foolishly at us. They were lying down on the ridge, they rode quite close, and then we all fired at once. Their confusion was so great that some just fell off their horses. Their war chiefs tried to get them to come at us again, but instead they ran the other way and left their wounded behind. That was a great battle. At that point he paused and once more addressed himself to our child, for whom the story was intended. Perhaps this talk of fighting and men dying means little to you. It is a little thing now, but when it was happening, it seemed big. You will die easily, but if you had lived then, you might have died fighting to live. Modeste continued his story. We thought guns would save our hunting grounds and make the old times return, but that was a mistake. This new kind of fighting just meant that more men were killed. It was bitter fighting, and we gained nothing. The pigeons made a peace, but it was not to be trusted. Men said, "We used to sleep all night, but now that we have peace with our enemies, we sleep in the day and watch all night." It was this way that a man feared to go hunting alone or in a small company, for the Piegans were always waiting. We dared not leave our villages unprotected, for our enemies would shoot our women and children and carry off everything. That was what it had come to. Our wise ones said we had to try something else. They began to look about. Many went off alone on praying fasts. It was clear that something had gone wrong. The people had lost their power. We had so few fighting men left we were afraid to count. It might be a bad thing to count men. So our wise ones began to say that we must find something new. Our voices, they said, no longer reached Amatoken. Maybe he has gone too far away, or maybe our voices have become weak, but when we speak in the old ways, we are not heard. Now some Indians came to us from the east. Perhaps you know them. They were from the Iroquois nation. They came here to trap, but when they had been here a while, we made them our brothers and asked them to live with us. They were the ones who told us about the Black Robe Fathers. We must send for them. The Fathers would help us to be strong. They had a power, a somish, and it was like this. It was two sticks, one stick across the other, like this. The Black Robe Fathers called it the crucifix. If they brought it to us, we would be strong again. That was what they told us, and it was what our own wise ones were looking for. This was a new thing. So we sent for the Black Robe Fathers 4 different times. We sent our people all the way to St. Louis, and finally the Fathers came to us here. They built a church, they baptized us. Here Modeste paused. No one looked up, no one stirred. In their thoughts they dwelt on that time in the past to which the old man had carried them. Then they heard him sigh. We thought they would bring back the power we had lost, but today we have less. This boy tells us the truth. Then his lips mumbled, Ayash chop mizin. I stopped talking to you. Our child, listening closely, felt something die within him. Some stiffness, some pride went weak before the old man's bitter, simple words. For the first time, when he had really seen it happen, the great first the great numbers and the power, then the falling away, the battles and starvation and the snow, the new hopes and the slow facing of disappointment, and then no hope at all. Just this living in the past, he had heard the story many times, but he had not listened. It had tired him. Now he saw that it had happened, and it left him feeling weak. It destroyed his stiffness toward the old people. He sat and thought about it, and the flames shot upward and made light on the circle of black pines. In the big house, Max tried to sleep, but his eyes would open, and there would be the glow of light on the walls of his bedroom. Voices would come up to him. He would frown and turn his face away. He tried to be angry at them for the noise they made, but pity was there ahead of his anger. Why was it that after 40 years he did not know these people and was not trusted by them? He had never interfered with their affairs, and he had never cheated them. They had lost a way of life, as Father Grappilio said, but damn it, why couldn't just one of his sons have the sense and courage to make himself a new way of life? He rolled away from the glow of light, but still the voices reached him. What were they saying? Why didn't they talk to him?